Hey everyone, welcome to HR Tech Talks. And if you're watching this, you're thinking, wait a minute, it's not Monday. Yes, you are correct. It is not Monday. We actually are running a special edition this week, talking to the team at OutMatch, and it's actually a great time because they just announced yet another acquisition yesterday as they're bringing their team up to speed and getting their product fleshed out. They're serving customers more so than ever. So I'm really looking forward to talking to Greg at OutMatch today about how the team is doing this, what they're offering to the market, and all those kind of fun things. But just really quick to set the stage for you. Number one, chime in, let us know where you're listening from. We'd love to hear from you as we go through. If you've got a question for him about what's happening in the hiring space and the assessment space, how to vet your candidates, all those kinds of things, that's what they do. So he'd be glad to take those questions. But also, we're seeing in our research a bigger focus than ever before on assessments as a tool to help us understand who's applying for our jobs, how to pick the right one in an unbiased way. There's lots of different things kind of driving that, including pandemic hiring and virtual hiring. So lots of things wrapped in there. So I'm so excited. This is great timing. So I'm going to go ahead and stop talking and welcome Greg to the show. Hey, glad to have you, sir.
Hey, Ben, how are you? Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
I'm so glad to have you here and really been looking forward to this conversation. So before we get into all the fun stuff about what OutMatch is doing and how you're serving the market, will you take a minute and tell us more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Greg Moran. I'm the president and CEO of OutMatch. Sitting here in a beautiful, stormy Dallas, Texas today, where OutMatch is based. And what OutMatch does is, we talk about it as building really the leading hiring experience stack, right? So really a composition of tools that come together to really help drive objectivity and speed and quality into into a hiring process at scale, for some of the top brands in the world.
Awesome.
So that's us.
Tremendous. And two of the outcomes you just mentioned there seem to be at odds with each other, or they were in the past, I'll say, right? Speed and quality. In the past, it was like, well, we're going to take forever, but we'll find that right sparkling, diamond, or we're going to hurry up and just hire someone because we got to fill this quickly and we'll take whatever we can get. And I feel like today that we don't have to make that decision between two bad or worse choices. We have a decision potentially to choose both of those. Would you agree? Totally.
That trade-off, I think is, certainly that's something that, historically, I think there was a lot of truth to that, right? Because, the inefficiency in the hiring process was really formed because it was such a manual process, right? So you really did, I think, have to kind of choose that balance between speed and quality. That trade-off does not exist anymore, and now it shouldn't exist. And I think in many companies it still does, but it doesn't need to, right? And the ability to actually be able to collect high-quality data to make a more informed hiring decision, but to do this, at a pace that actually solves the underlying problem of getting the right person in the seat in the organization. Those two things can coexist in a really in a way that we haven't been able to see before. We talk about at OutMatch, we talk about this concept of letting the candidate drive, right, as being this really hallmark of what we do. And that concept of letting the candidate drive is really about enabling a process where a candidate can move through the selection process at their own speed. And because of advances in AI and machine learning and just tech in general, you can allow the candidate to go in and take their assessment, and from the assessment be able to then move directly into a recorded video that using AI you can get a kind of a very quick assessment of if that candidate still is a strong fit or not. Be able to schedule an in-person interview, and essentially, without any real recruiter engagement, that candidate has moved themselves really into a finalist for that role. So, and you've got really high quality data.
I love that, putting the power in the hands of the candidates, because increasingly they have more information, more data at their fingertips than ever before, right? They can look at what your culture is like. They can know more about your company, your hiring processes, the questions you ask. They can get really deep insights, especially if you're a large enterprise, about who you are. And then they get into that hiring funnel, and I hate using the term black hole because everybody uses it, right? But it's like, I don't know where I am. I don't know what's going on. I have no point of contact, right? I'm just waiting on, maybe they'll move me on, but you don't have any sort of clarity there. And so I love that picture you're painting about a candidate having the opportunity to move through that at their own pace. If they're, hey, I'm a nurse, I'm having a terrible night at work, and I want to look for another role immediately and be able to move through that. Do that. Don't make me wait. Don't make me hold up. Don't wait. 2 weeks from now, we'll get back to you on what the next step is, because that drags it out. And again, in a tight hiring market, you've already missed the chance to get that person, especially if they're high quality. They're the ones that are going to get snapped up quickly. So you've got to be able to move and adapt quickly in your hiring process. Or you're going to miss out on those candidates.
That's right. Yeah, totally. I mean, it's about providing transparency to the candidate, right? It's, in some ways, it's like akin to, if you think about like what the car buying experience was, a decade or more ago, and you think about what the car buying experience is today. I mean, there's really no point, unless you really enjoy just intense amount of pain. There's no point in ever walking into a car dealership without doing your own research, right? You know what you're getting. You know the car. You've done the work before you walk in. And really, at that point, it's about test driving. It's about, it's about just getting that sort of last feel for it before you go and you make the purchase. And if you think about it from a candidate's perspective, they're going into your organization. They know what they're getting. They should know what they're getting, right? And there are ways that you can make that really simple to be able to provide the information to a candidate that they need to get, just through, some simulation, some videos, some just really kind of thoughtful ways to be able to market the opportunity, market the culture of the business. They know what they're getting. Let them move themselves through at their own pace.
Well, that's another kind of theme to this, is you're not just putting the candidates in the center of it, letting them have some control at pace, but like you were saying, this becomes a dialogue. It's not just I'm picking you and I hold all the power and I'm going to control this. But in that process, you're like, hey, wait a minute. I get to kind of a preview of the job and I realize this is not what I thought it was. You get a chance to leave before we're both invested in this financially or emotionally, and find out, hey, this is actually not a good fit. Or before we hire you and find out, hey, a month later you're gone because we sold it a different way, we pitched it a different way in the recruiting process. So there's so many different benefits to making that transparent, making that a two-way sort of conversation, so candidates have a say-so in that. I plan on taking the conversation today towards like the employer side, but there's so much value to that, especially in a tight market where everyone's trying to find candidates. And we're seeing right now some states are changing their unemployment provisions because saying we can't find enough people, so we're trying to make it easier for employers to find people. Agree or not with that decision, it's happening.
That's totally right. Totally right. I mean, I don't know if you saw the data, the labor market data yesterday that came out about job postings. I mean, 8 million open positions in the United States, right? 8 million. It's like these are unprecedented numbers.
Yes.
And we're still coming out of a pandemic at this point, right? So, I mean, yeah, it's crazy what's happening in the labor market. And if you want to be able to compete, to bring people into your, one of the areas that it's hitting is really the high volume type of roles, right? It's retail, it's restaurant, it's hospitality, it's things like that. This is where you really need to be able to do a good job of explaining to a candidate why coming to work for you, is something that they should be considering. Because quite honestly, we also have this other dynamic, and I'm not expressing an opinion on this per se, and I don't mean this to sound political, but you have this other dynamic right now where you're not only competing with other employers, you're also competing with people not going back to work, right? Because of extensions in unemployment benefits and things like that. So that is a whole other dynamic that I don't think as employers we've really ever faced something like that, where we're actually competing with, fundamentally we're competing with the government. Again, you can certainly have your opinion whether that's a good thing or bad thing, but it's a different dynamic for sure.
Yes. That's why I mentioned that piece, because I saw this morning I saw yesterday that our state is going to be, Alabama is going to be making some changes to try to encourage people that are still not working to go back to work. And again, there are people that have health concerns, everything else. There's lots of stuff that you and I are not qualified to comment on necessarily, right? But at the same time, an employer, I've talked to employers personally who are saying, I'm trying to hire, and people are saying, no, I'm making more money at home than I am at the office. And I can drive down the road 20 minutes and see 10 help wanted signs posted, right? Those might not even be included in those job posting numbers you're talking about, where it's just people that locally, looking for a warm body, essentially. And so, okay, lots of things we're talking about here. One of the things I want to shift to just a bit, because we talked about lots of these different aspects. One of the things in terms of the power of candidates and creating an experience that excites them, in the past, the whole idea of using an assessment and hiring process, anecdotally, I kept hearing people saying, well, that's going to drive candidates away. They're not going to be excited about that. They're not going to enjoy that experience. And so we actually did some analysis on that a couple of years ago. And I want to get your take on this. We talked to candidates and said, how do you feel about assessments? And they said, we like them if it's connected, there's a line of sight between what we're doing and what the actual job would entail. If it's something generic or vague, right? Tell me about yourself and I'll just judge you on that. That's hard. But if it's, hey, you're going to be going for a marketing role, how do you spend this marketing budget? We're going to give you a hypothetical budget, right? Or you're going to go into finance. How do you balance this budget over here? And so giving them something related to it, they said they actually liked those things. What are you hearing? Because you serve this tremendous candidate population with different assessment tools and things like that. What are you hearing on that front?
Yeah, really similar. I mean, so just to give you a kind of a sense of scale, we run in this year, we'll run about 25 million candidates through our technology. And we do a lot of surveying, right, within that candidate base. And we hear the virtually the same thing as you are, right? Where, I think prior to the pandemic, when unemployment was at its lowest point, one of the things that we heard a lot from employers was exactly what you said. Hey, we're really concerned about doing anything at all that like screens anybody, right? We're just trying to see. And what we heard from candidates is that's really concerning. Like it is so clear to a candidate that you actually don't value the talent that you bring in. You may think you're doing a favor to a candidate by making this like, non-existent screening process.
Frictionless, yeah.
Right, but it's not that at all. Candidates do want to know that there is some matching going on, right? Like there is something happening to say, hey, you, Ben, are a really good fit for this role, and we want to see this come together, right? We want you to come work for our organization. So, we heard that when we still continue to hear that over and over. Candidates are willing to move through a process and actually want to move through a process, but like you said, that process has to make sense, right? Mm-hmm. The sort of old approach of, hey, I want you to take this 45-minute long assessment about your personality, to come work at as a server or a bartender in the restaurant. That doesn't make any sense, right? And candidates are going to be really unwilling to do that. But to go through and take a shorter assessment that really matches that person to the role, to go through asking relevant questions, that's again quick and commensurate to the role. Candidates are going to. They feel better about that because there's something happening, right? There's something that says, and you're not basically just saying to somebody, hey, come in, give it a shot. And if this doesn't work, I'm just basically going to fire you. Like that's our screening process.
Yeah. You're disposable, right?
That's right. Nobody wants that.
I wrote down from that, my big takeaway from that was 100% throughput, right? In your hiring funnel is not a goal we should be shooting for, because we should be helping them self-select out. We should be down selecting for the kinds of roles that we're looking for, because the person that fits role A doesn't necessarily fit role B, role C, role D, and so on down the list. And we need to be doing those things.
I'll give you a great example of this, Ben. One of our clients, long-term, they run long-term care facilities, have hundreds of locations, and they hire thousands and thousands of CNAs, nursing assistants, basically a year. And the biggest issue for turnover in that role, the turnover was out of control, right? So they were actually doing a really good job of selling people into the role. This is a great way to make some money while you're, if you want some medical experience, some healthcare experience, all this stuff, right? They were doing a really good job of getting people into that role. The problem was, once people got in the role, what they weren't telling them is, oh, hey, by the way, you're going to be cleaning bedpans and giving people sponge baths and doing things like this. And people kind of got into the role. And it sounds so crazy when you think about it. It's like, I don't want to do that work, right? Like, and all of a sudden now they're going in. So being able to just simply change the process a little bit by providing that realistic job preview to say, hey, these are all the reasons that you should do this, but let's be honest about it. Before you start down this road, this is actually what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, and you do actually need to live with that, right? You're forcing candidates out of the pipeline, but the people going through now are going in eyes wide open, right? So that's, you know, so your throughput's actually going to go down. Quality's going to go up, right?
Quality goes up. I would say that gap between my expectations and reality, the bigger that gap is, the more likely that person's going to turn over quickly because they were, like you said, oversold, right? Or it was just the pitch or the way you presented that was incorrect, whether on purpose, because this is a hard job and it's hard to fill and we're just going to get them in here, or on accident, purely by accident. Lots of companies just don't quite realize that because they never stop to do, here's a day in the life of what a CNA does. The first HR job I ever had, we actually hired CNAs. So I'm having some flashbacks here as you're mentioning that example, thinking about the times where that's the thing we had to do is we sit them down and say, this is what the work is like. We're going to have someone talk to you that does the work and they're going to explain to you those things. Right. And so that's tremendous.
Well, it's, you know, and I think one of the things that, you know, organizations really struggle with, right, is there are so many vanity metrics around talent acquisition that I think, you know, when you start to overly index on things like time to fill, you know, throughput rates of candidates going through the pipeline, when you start to really over-index on those, because they are vanity metrics, right? I mean, they're interesting to know, but they're not really business drivers at all. That's when you start to see things like that. You start to get this misalignment between talent acquisition and the business, the rest of the business in general.
So I love that you called that out, because that's one of the things I beat that drum steadily, which that should not be the highest calling in TA, is how fast can I put somebody's butt in that seat. But I would argue, and we did some research a few years ago, everyone said quality is most important. But then when it came to it, you'll appreciate this. We're talking to these heads of TA. They're like, what's the most important metric? Quality is most important for us. Okay, how do you measure that? They get that kind of shifty eye, like, I'm not quite sure. How does everybody else measure it? And so talk about what quality of hire means in the world that the customers OutMatch is serving. I know that's a priority for the customers you're working with. Talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, the way that we look at it, right? So I think there's different levels of when you think about quality of hire, right? Because it is a really sort of nebulous term that you know, can mean a lot to different people. There's really levels of this, right? And you know, number one, I think at the highest level, if you're the CEO of the business, right, you're determining quality of hire ultimately by the performance of the organization, right? If you're getting better people in the job, if they're doing a better job, if they're staying longer, if they're performing at a higher level, the business is going to perform, right? So that's sort of the most macro level. But if you think about it from a talent acquisition standpoint, what can we control, right? What can talent acquisition actually control? And it really is about, can I get this person in the role? Can I do this in a way that you know, they're going to onboard successfully in the early stage of their performance is going to be strong, right? However that's defined. You know, we typically think about that in, like, you know, depending on the role. I mean, this can change, but I mean, if you try to put an average on it, like, what does that first 90 days look like? Do you have the person up and running and performing in the job over that period of time and performing at an acceptable level? That's what we can control as, you know, from a talent acquisition standpoint. From that point, right, it really is going to be about the relationship with the manager and the, you know, the long culture of the organization, the strategy of the organization. So the impact of the hiring process actually starts to fall away, and the business is really gonna take over. But so the way that we really think about it is, over that first X period, 60 days, 90 days, depending on the role, some really high, like more transactional roles. We see this with a lot of our like BPO and call center clients. I mean, you could be defining this inside of a week or two. You know, it's really about, do I have the person performing at the level that we need them to be performing within some short-term phase after they come on, whether that's 60 days, 90 days, something like that. And I think, and really, you know, it doesn't have to be a whole lot harder than, what does the manager say about the direct manager say about this individual's performance, and what does the individual say about their own performance, right? And their likelihood of staying with the company. So, you know, I think we have a tendency to really try to over-engineer this and make this way more complicated than it needs to be. But really, those two things are really going to determine, like, have we done our job from a talent acquisition standpoint?
I think part of the challenge is that what you're saying, kind of that sliding scale, that the longer they've been there, the more that responsibility shifts off of what that recruiter told them, and the more it shifts onto the shoulders of their direct leader, right? The other policies, the leadership, the culture, all those kinds of things that wrap around that employee and how they get the work done day to day. I think that's part of it, is that starts to shift over time. But early on, like the first turnover in the first month, that's pretty heavy, unless that manager is just out there, right? And that's another hiring problem. But unless they're just out there, a lot of times that can be attributed back to whether the person was, as we said earlier in the CNA example, sold appropriately on the job, those kinds of things. And again, that was a problem we ran into. That's why we had to change some processes, because we were not appropriately doing that, and we ran into the same issue that the company did you talked about, and we had to make some shifts and changes there. And it allowed us to get someone in that stuck around, that performed, that was excited about the work, that referred other people to come work there. Like all those kinds of metrics they might be primary, but they're things that we look for to show that we're doing a good job in our hiring and our culture and things like that. So lots of things wrap in around that.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't need to be a whole lot harder than that, I think, and again, from a TA standpoint, it doesn't really need to be a whole lot harder than that if we are just really focused on, does the candidate believe that this job is what they believed it to be, and this is a job where they see themselves staying and performing, and does the manager feel the same way? And I think if you can get those two things down, you can really optimize the process around that pretty effectively.
I read a book years ago that now it seems kind of simple, because it was early in my recruiting days and I hadn't had a lot of experience. So I was always, latching on any resource I could. And one of the recommendations was, when you finish filling a rec, just pop a note out to the manager saying, 1 to 10, how was that? And what could I have done better? And just, you don't have to do that for every single job you fill, but it was just a way to say, how are we doing? And that's almost become a quality sort of metric for me, like by proxy, like, did this fit your needs? Because if it didn't, I need to know now before I send you another one like that next week. Let's make sure we got this right. And that became sort of a way for me to gauge. And really, a big part of this is the conversation with your leaders, with your hiring leaders, and making sure you're on the same page and all those kind of fun things. And to bring it back to some of the conversation around assessments and things like that, that gives us a way to objectively and clearly, in an unbiased way, look at each candidate and give all of them a fair shake at this job. Not just to say, we're evaluating you, you can learn about us, you can learn about what this job's like. So there's a couple different features in there that help us to form a kind of foundation for those conversations and make sure the quality thing we're looking for is embedded into that, or missed expectations like we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing it does is that taking that kind of simple survey approach, right? If you're doing it at checkpoints, and part of our technology actually does this, where it goes out and it surveys, but again, you don't need our technology. I mean, you can do this for SurveyMonkey, you can do this with anything, right? At certain checkpoints, again, depending on the job, it might be, on a weekly basis or, every 30 days, depending on what it is. It's surveying both the candidate and the hiring manager, basically saying, how is this working out, right? You're asking both parties. The other part, the other thing that really does is it will often actually be able to preempt turnover, right? So you're actually getting an early warning on, hey, this is starting to go off the rails a little bit, where you can actually intervene and prevent turnover that may have occurred otherwise. Sometimes just a simple misalignment that you can, with some additional training or whatever, you can actually prevent that turnover from actually occurring.
Yeah, those are the ones that I call the kind of the head bonk moments, where you're like, that was such a simple thing, we just never thought about that, or we just didn't realize that, and make that one small change and it solves for that issue. It's not always that easy, right? But for those times that the solution is that simple, it comes from clear lines of communication, asking those questions that you're talking about, and not just in your case, not just talking to the hiring managers, like you said, but talking to the candidates too. Get their feedback on that, because they have drank the champagne or eaten the dog food or whatever the metaphor is you want. Right? They've been through that process, and they can tell you what that was like and how it felt. Most importantly, through each step of it, because that's going to magnify across every single candidate you interact with, and it's a chance to hopefully make that a little better experience if possible.
That's right. Yeah. I'm amazed at how many organizations don't do it, and I think you can. The nice part is, if you're getting good, if when the candidates are coming back, and most of them presumably are going to be positive, it just gives you a really easy way to have that candidate say, hey, great, appreciate the feedback, go to Glassdoor. And give them a link to Glassdoor. I mean, it's really, really, really simple stuff, right? Yes. And you get the added benefit there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's
certainly
that easy, but it's a good place to start.
And say, if you didn't like it, tell me. If you didn't like it, tell your friends. There you go. All right.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So we're coming up close to the end of the conversation, Greg, and I've enjoyed this thoroughly. If someone is curious about OutMatch, what the team is up to, who you're serving, and again, that we didn't even talk about some of the announcements and things that have been just recent, but just the company's growing rapidly, and you're serving customers around the world. If someone wants to know more about some of those kinds of things, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Go to outmatch.com. You can that's going to be the fastest way to reach us. Just go there and connect through there. Connect with us socially. You can find us on LinkedIn. It's just OutMatch on LinkedIn. And love to have a dialogue. I mean, yeah, there's certainly a lot of exciting stuff. You and I were chatting about this earlier. We just completed an acquisition yesterday. Or announced an acquisition yesterday of Harvard, who's probably what we believe is unquestionably the world's leading product for high volume hiring, hourly and professional hiring based out of Amsterdam. So really expands our footprint globally. So certainly, while some of the stuff we're talking about today is really U.S. based, I mean, we're very much service clients all over the world.
Yes, absolutely. That's why I want to make sure we touch on that one, because you're serving companies around the world, and some of those industries you talked about, right? They're coming back not just here, but globally, and that's the hope anyway, as vaccines and everything else continue. So it's going to be fast paced. We talked about some of the common challenges in hiring, and I would imagine anyone that's listening in that's trying to hire is probably starting. If they haven't already, they're going to start feeling some of those the pinch, the pain there around that, and using tools to scale that up. Thinking about that as a two-way dialogue. Some of the key points from our conversation today, I think, will help employers. So I appreciate you for hanging out with me, Greg, for sharing your expertise, and for taking some time out of the busy schedule. I know you're probably talking with everybody about the new announcements and everything else. And congratulations again. I appreciate you. All right. Hopefully you enjoyed that conversation with Greg and the crew over at OutMatch. They're doing great work. So you mentioned they just completed this acquisition of Harvard. They have acquired multiple companies in our space in the last few years, trying to become this complete tech stack for hiring. And I've been impressed and excited just watching them kind of pull these things together over time, because today the hiring process is more complex, arguably, than it ever has been. And at the same time, we need it to be streamlined and focused and targeted so we can find the right candidates and get them in. So thank you all for hanging out with us on HR Tech Talk today. I appreciate you. We'll be back next Monday, as usual, with a new episode, new conversation with another company. I appreciate each one of you, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.